Sergeant Michael Reynolds had once been known for his perfect steps, his steady gaze, and the unshakable calm that defined a soldier's pride. In his youth, he had stood among the most respected men in America, a tomb guard at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery. It was not just a position. It was a sacred trust. Every movement he made back then had to be exact. Every second counted, every salute flawless. Rain, snow, or blazing heat, it didn't matter. The tomb was never left unguarded. Years had passed since those days of discipline and duty. Michael was now in his 70s, living a quiet life in a small Virginia neighborhood with his daughter, Emily. To most of their neighbors, he was just a polite old man who always stood a little too straight when he greeted people, who still polished his shoes, and who sometimes paused during his morning walks to adjust an invisible uniform. They didn't know that behind those gentle eyes lived a man who had given everything to honor those who could no longer speak for themselves. But time has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. A few years ago, doctors had told Emily that her father had Alzheimer's disease. At first it was small things. He would forget where he left his keys or the names of friends. Then he started repeating stories, mixing up dates, and losing track of time. Emily tried to stay strong, telling herself that her father, who had once stood unflinching through storms at Arlington, could face this too. But deep down she knew Alzheimer's was an enemy he couldn't outmarch or outfight. Still, there were moments when the old soldier inside him seemed to wake again. One evening, as the rain poured outside, Emily walked into the living room to find her father standing completely still by the window. His back was straight, his arms at his sides, eyes fixed on something unseen. At first she thought he was confused again, but then she heard him whisper softly, "The relief guard is late. The tomb must not be left alone." Her heart stopped for a moment. "Dad," she said gently, walking toward him, "there's no relief guard here. You're home." But Michael didn't turn. His voice was calm, strong, and carried the same tone that once commanded respect. "A soldier never leaves his post," he said simply. Emily stood there in silence. Outside the rain fell harder, but Michael didn't move. He stood there for nearly 20 minutes, completely still, as if time itself had stopped. When he finally sat down, his hands trembled slightly. Emily helped him to the couch, tears welling in her eyes. Alzheimer's had taken away so much, his memories, his sense of direction, but it couldn't touch what was deepest in his heart. His sense of duty still lived inside him, shining through the fog of his illness like a small, steady light. In the following weeks, Emily began noticing more signs of his soldier's habits returning in strange ways. He would wake up at exactly the same time every morning, even without an alarm. Sometimes she'd find him in the yard at sunrise, standing perfectly still with his hand over his heart. When she asked what he was doing, he'd simply reply, "It's time to relieve the watch." Neighbors who passed by would smile kindly, not understanding. To them it was just an old man acting out some forgotten routine. But to Emily it was heartbreaking and beautiful all at once. It was as if his mind, searching for solid ground, had found its way back to the only thing that never changed, his honor as a tomb guard. One afternoon, Emily sat with him as they looked through an old photo album. The pictures showed him in his crisp uniform, his face young and determined. There was one photo of him standing before the tomb, rifle in hand, posture perfect. She pointed at it and said, "That's you, isn't it?" Michael stared for a long moment, his brow furrowed as if he were trying to remember something far away. Then suddenly his eyes filled with recognition. "Yes," he whispered. "That's my post." He reached out and touched the photo gently, his fingers trembling. "They told us," he said softly, "that this duty is forever. You never stop guarding them, not even when you're gone." Emily couldn't speak. She closed the album and took his hand. For a few minutes they just sat together in silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock and the faint rain outside. Later that night, as Emily helped her father prepare for bed, he turned to her and said something that stayed with her forever. "Emily," he said quietly, "if I ever forget your name, just remind me of the tomb. It'll bring me back." That night she cried after he fell asleep. Alzheimer's could take away so many things, but it couldn't steal the soul of a soldier who had once pledged to protect something greater than himself. The next morning, she woke to find him already standing by the front door, wearing his old coat and polished shoes. "Where are you going, Dad?" she asked, trying not to sound alarmed. He looked at her with that same steady gaze she remembered from her childhood. "They're waiting for me at Arlington," he said simply. "I'm late for my shift." Emily's breath caught. She didn't correct him this time. Instead, she helped him sit down and brought him a cup of tea. She knew the day would come when he would no longer recognize her, or his home, or even his own reflection. But she also knew that somewhere deep inside, the tomb guard still stood his silent watch. That night, as she tucked him in, Michael whispered again, half in a dream, "Never left unguarded." And Emily realized that her father's honor, his devotion, his discipline, his silent courage was something no disease could truly erase. The body could weaken, the mind could fade, but the heart of a tomb guard never stopped standing watch. Even as sleep claimed him, he rested with his hands folded neatly, his posture calm and precise. In that quiet little home miles away from Arlington, the spirit of duty still lived. Alzheimer's could blur the edges of his memory, but it could never touch his sense of honor. Emily had been thinking about it for weeks. Her father, Sergeant Michael Reynolds, had spent decades guarding the tomb of the unknown soldier, a duty that demanded perfect precision and unshakable discipline. Even Alzheimer's could not erase the part of him that lived and breathed honor. She decided it was time to bring him back to Arlington National Cemetery, even if only for a short visit. The morning was quiet as Emily helped her father into the car. Michael wore his old coat neatly pressed and his shoes shined, even though they had long lost their original polish. His eyes seemed distant, but once the familiar road toward Arlington appeared, a spark of recognition lit up his face. His hands tightened on the armrests, his back straightened, and a quiet hum of rhythm escaped his lips, a cadence he had once marched to countless times. "Dad, we're almost there," Emily said softly. He didn't answer at first, but she noticed the slight nod, a tiny acknowledgement that he understood. The closer they got, the more focused he became. By the time they reached the gates of Arlington, Michael's body carried the tension and pride of a soldier ready for duty. Emily parked, and they walked slowly toward the ceremonial area. The morning air was crisp and the grounds were perfectly maintained. Soldiers marched with precision, and the faint echo of boots on marble filled the space. Michael's eyes followed every movement. His hand instinctively went to his side, brushing against his coat as if a rifle were still there. Emily could feel his heartbeat, steady but fast, as if his body remembered a rhythm his mind sometimes forgot. One of the young tomb guards, noticing the old veteran, approached them cautiously. He was polite but curious, observing the man who stood tall despite his age. "Ma'am, can I help you?" the guard asked. Emily explained that her father had once been a tomb guard himself. She told him about Michael's years of service, his dedication, and the struggle with Alzheimer's. The guard's expression shifted. He had heard stories of veteran tomb guards returning for visits, but he had never seen one with such dignity and clear, practiced form. He nodded and led them closer to the ceremonial area. "It's an honor to have him here," he said quietly. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. As they approached the tomb, Michael's gaze sharpened. His steps became careful, deliberate, and Emily realized he was matching the rhythm of the current guards. His lips moved almost silently, reciting the words of discipline he had learned decades ago. Every turn, every step, every posture seemed to flow naturally, as if the years had vanished. A small crowd had gathered, noticing the elderly man moving with such precise movements. Some whispered among themselves, impressed by his poise. Emily felt tears in her eyes but stayed quiet, letting her father live this moment. For Michael, it was as if he had returned to a place where time did not matter, a place where duty and honor were all that existed. The guard who had led them stopped beside Michael, bowing slightly. "Sergeant Reynolds," he said, "welcome back. We honor your service." Michael looked at him, eyes shining, and gave a slow, firm salute. It was perfect. The guard returned the salute with respect, and a hush fell over the few visitors nearby. Even the other guards, who never broke formation, seemed touched by the sight. Emily watched as her father stood for several minutes, completely still. The wind blew gently, rustling the trees, but Michael did not move. It was a moment of connection across time, a living testament to a man who had once sworn to never leave the tomb unguarded. Alzheimer's may have tried to erase him, but the soldier within had returned, even if only for a fleeting moment. After the ceremonial rotation, the young guard guided Emily and her father to a quiet bench nearby. Emily asked, "Dad, do you remember this place?" Michael looked at her, his eyes distant for a moment, then focused on the tomb. "I remember. My duty, always my duty," he said. There was no hesitation. Alzheimer's may have stolen some memories, but it had no power over his sense of honor. Emily smiled, holding his hand. She noticed the small tremor in his fingers, but also the calm strength in his posture. It was strange and beautiful to see him return to the form he had carried for so long. The young guard nearby nodded in quiet respect, understanding the significance of what he was witnessing. They spent the afternoon at Arlington, walking slowly along the grounds. Michael sometimes paused, staring at the headstones, sometimes speaking softly as if addressing the soldiers who could no longer respond. Emily didn't correct him. She let him speak, let him remember in his own way. Each word, each gesture, each glance carried the weight of decades of service and unwavering devotion. At one point, Michael stopped near the tomb again, raising his hand in salute. His hand trembled slightly, but the gesture was as perfect as ever. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She saw in that moment that her father's spirit had not been broken. The disease had taken parts of him, but it could not touch the core of his courage, his discipline, and his commitment. Even the young guard watching felt a deep sense of admiration. He had trained for years to serve at the tomb, learning every step, every pause, every silent rule. Yet here stood a man who had done it for decades, who could no longer recall the day's date or the faces of his loved ones, and still carried the weight of that honor with every fiber of his being. By the end of the visit, Michael was tired, but there was a sense of peace in his eyes. Emily helped him to a bench under a large oak tree. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting a soft glow over the cemetery. He leaned back, letting his body rest, but keeping his hands folded neatly, his posture still dignified. Emily knew that this would be one of the last times her father could visit Arlington in this way. Alzheimer's would continue to take more from him each day. But in that moment, Michael had returned to the place that defined his life, even if only briefly. He had stood watch once again, saluted the fallen, and reminded everyone around him, family, guards, and visitors, that true honor never fades. As they prepared to leave, Michael looked at Emily and whispered, "I did my duty, always my duty." Emily squeezed his hand, tears flowing freely. "Yes, Dad, you did, and you always will." Even as they walked back to the car, she could see him returning to the soldier he had once been, if only in spirit. Alzheimer's might take away words, faces, and time, but it could never take the honor of a man who had dedicated his life to standing watch over the unknown. And that day at Arlington, amidst the solemnity of the tomb and the respect of those around him, Michael Reynolds proved something profound. A soldier's heart, once forged in honor and discipline, can never be. The weeks after their visit to Arlington were quiet but filled with small, meaningful moments. Michael Reynolds's condition continued to change, sometimes for the worse. Alzheimer's slowly blurred the lines of his memory. Faces, dates, and familiar places sometimes became strangers to him. Yet there was one thing that never faded. The part of him that was a soldier. The part that carried honor and discipline even when everything else seemed to vanish. Every morning, Emily would wake to find her father standing by the window, back straight, hands folded as if guarding something invisible. Sometimes he whispered to himself softly, "Never left unguarded, never left unguarded." Those words had been part of him for decades, and now they had become his tether to reality, his connection to the duty he had once sworn to uphold. One afternoon, Emily received a letter from Arlington. It was an invitation for her father to attend a small ceremonial honor for veteran tomb guards. They understood his condition and offered a private, respectful event where he could be recognized without the crowd. Emily knew it would be difficult, but she also knew it might be the last time her father could truly participate in the place he loved so deeply. The day of the ceremony, Emily dressed her father carefully. His uniform was gone now. Years of wear and changes had taken their toll, but she pinned a small flag pin to his chest and brushed his hair neatly. His eyes, though clouded at times, brightened slightly as they approached Arlington. He seemed to recognize the place again, though he could not name it. Still, his back straightened, his posture steady, as if the grounds themselves reminded him of his purpose. At the ceremonial area, several tomb guards from the current and past rotations awaited. They stood at attention, silent and respectful. When Michael approached, they immediately recognized the strength of the man who had once stood among them, guarding the unknown soldier with unwavering commitment. Even without his uniform, the dignity in his movements spoke louder than any decoration could. Emily guided him to a place near the tomb. One young guard stepped forward, bowing slightly. "Sergeant Reynolds," he said, "it is our honor to have you here today." Michael's hand went to his forehead in a salute. It was slow and deliberate, but perfect in form. The guards around him returned the salute, a silent acknowledgement that the duty and honor he had carried for decades were never forgotten. Some of the veterans' eyes glistened with tears, recognizing the profound courage and discipline in a man who had given so much. The ceremony began with a quiet moment of reflection. Emily held her father's hand as the bugler played taps. Michael's eyes followed the folded flag in front of the tomb, a symbol of all that he had dedicated his life to protecting. Though he no longer remembered names or dates, he remembered the essence of his duty. It was in his posture, his gestures, and the steady rhythm of his breath. Alzheimer's could cloud his mind, but it could not reach the core of his honor. After the ceremony, a few of the tomb guards approached Emily. They spoke softly, telling her that her father's dedication had inspired them. "Ma'am," one guard said, "we train every day, but your father, he carried the duty like it was a part of his soul. Even now I see it in him." Emily smiled through her tears, grateful that someone else recognized what she had always known. Michael, exhausted from the visit, sat on a bench under a tree near the tomb. He rested his hands in his lap, back still straight, eyes gazing at the white marble. For a long while he said nothing. Emily waited quietly, knowing that in moments like this words were unnecessary. The silence between them was filled with respect, love, and the shared understanding of a life lived with honor. As the sun began to set, painting the cemetery in shades of gold and orange, Michael spoke softly, almost to himself. "Emily, the tomb. Never alone. Never left alone." His voice was faint but carried the weight of decades of service. Emily held his hand, tears flowing freely. She whispered, "Yes, Dad, you never left it alone. You never will." The drive home was quiet. Michael leaned back in his seat, eyes closed, as if the visit had brought him peace. Emily watched him carefully, knowing that the disease would continue its slow, relentless course. But she also knew something stronger endured, something that Alzheimer's could never touch. His sense of duty, his honor, and his courage remained intact, even as memories slipped away. In the weeks that followed, Michael's condition continued to decline. He could no longer remember familiar faces or the details of his life. Sometimes he became agitated or confused, but there were always those small fleeting moments when the old soldier inside him reemerged. A perfect salute, a disciplined stance, a whispered phrase never left unguarded, reminded Emily that his spirit remained untouchable. When Michael eventually passed away, Emily arranged for a private ceremony at Arlington. Several tomb guards, past and present, stood at attention, honoring the man who had given his life to duty, discipline, and respect. His flag-draped casket was carried slowly toward the tomb, and Emily walked beside it, tears streaming down her face. The guards executed the rifle salute with precision, and the bugler played taps. Emily noticed the young guard who had met her father during their previous visit. He stood at attention, silently acknowledging the courage and honor of the man who had inspired him and so many others. After the ceremony, Emily approached the young guard. "He forgot so much," she said softly, "even me." "But he never forgot the tomb." The guard nodded. "Ma'am, that's because the tomb never leaves you, not even when memories fade. Your father's honor lived right here in every step, every salute, every moment he remembered it. Alzheimer's could never take that from him." Emily looked at the marble, at the folded flags, and at the guards who stood silently in tribute. She realized that her father's life was more than just his service. It was a testament to the strength of human spirit, the power of discipline, and the enduring weight of honor. He had faced a disease that could erase memories, but he had carried his duty like a shield, untouchable and eternal. That evening, Emily returned home, feeling both sorrow and pride. She knew her father was gone, yet the essence of who he had been, the soldier who had never left his post, the man who had carried honor above all else, would live on forever. Alzheimer's had taken his memories, but it could never take the heart of a tomb guard. Emily placed her father's old photo of the tomb on her desk, the one where he stood tall in uniform, rifle in hand, posture perfect. She smiled through her tears. "Even now," she whispered, "you are still guarding them." And in that quiet home, miles away from Arlington, Emily felt it clearly. Her father's spirit had not faded. The lessons of courage, discipline, and honor that he had embodied would never be forgotten. They were eternal. Alzheimer's might have taken the man, but it had never stolen the honor of a tomb guard.